we have one more distinguished speaker here for you today. Our next speaker is Dr. Stuart Appel, who is from the Brockport State University, SUNY at Brockport. Stuart began his graduate work in experimental psychology at the Pennsylvania State University and received his PhD from George Washington University. He's currently a dean, at the School of Letters and Sciences at Brockport, an appointment which followed a number of different administrative positions that he's had at various colleges and at Brockport. In addition, he has held teaching and research positions at George Washington University, Mount Vernon College, the University of Rochester School of Medicine and Dentistry, and is currently part of the faculty at the Department of Psychology at SUNY Brockport. Dr. Appel's research has focused on various issues in the field of cognitive science, including visual and tactual sensation and perception, and the nature of consciousness itself. This work has covered theoretical problems in the senses, applied problems relative to blind and developmentally delayed populations, and topics of popular interest such as hypnosis and anomalous experiences, such as reported observations of UFOs and accounts of alien abductions. In regard to this latter area of investigation, Dr. Appel argues that teachers and scholars and academicians have a responsibility to bring issues of general public interest before a scientific audience and to bring the voice of science to the general public. Without further ado, I give you Stuart Appel.
There may be some further ado because my computer is not hooked up and I don't know where the tech person went to. But we are supposed to be changing from Mac to PC, and yeah. But while that is going on, let me thank Niagara County Community College for inviting me here and also for putting on this this whole convention. And not just want to thank Niagara, but also compliment them on doing such a fine job on the convention. And also want to thank those of you who are here, and maybe you need some congratulations also. How many of you have been here all day? Nearly all of you. That's very impressive. There are some problems with that. One of the things that psychologists have learned is that after about 45 minutes, there's a significant drop in your ability to attend and to engage in critical thought. So by now, there may be some serious deficits in regard to those categories, but that may work for me because now I can say the most outrageous things I want and go unchallenged in regard to that. Actually, I didn't think I was going to say anything too controversial, since basically my main conclusion is that we need more research. But given some of the presenters today, perhaps that's the most controversial position one can take. But I am not here to make a case for anything. I do not champion a cause. I do not advocate a particular view other than that science should prevail. And that's going to be basically the approach I'll be taking in my presentation. To some extent, what I'll be talking about might be thought of as Alien Abductions 101. My intent is to provide an overview of the various theories and to look at what the best evidence we have, where we have evidence, what that says about the nature of the theories, and also how consistent the theories are with the particular characteristics of the alien abduction experience. So again, my presentation doesn't stem from any a priori ideas about false memory or anything else. I just want to look at all the theories that have been advanced and kind of give you some awareness of this. And as you'll see, it's far more extensive in terms of theoretical approaches than simply dealing with false memory. And where did the clicker go? Thank you. One of the disadvantages of being the last speaker in any session is that you can't always anticipate what the people before you are going to say, and to some extent there may be some redundancies in my talk. That's the bad news. I guess the good news is I can go through those quickly, and maybe we can get to the general discussion a little bit sooner. But I think before we talk about the theories, one of the things we should at least do is quickly review what the characteristics are of the experience that we are trying to explain. There we go. Oh, here my key. There are some experiences actually associated with it. First of all, one of the obvious ones is that the experiences do report that the experiences do seem subjectively real. They don't seem generally like dreams or vague notions. For the most part, they seem very real. This is one of the reasons why many people who have abduction experiences are reluctant to accept alternative points of view other than the fact that the experiences are real. They'll tell you, if I deny these experiences, I might as well deny any experience I have. They feel just as real to me as regular experiences do. Of course, there's capture by aliens. They're brought to what they at least interpret as an alien craft. There are lots of physical and psychological procedures that take place. We've heard some of them discussed. A lot haven't been discussed, but there are quite a few. And you've heard about missing time. That's the term that's given to the loss of memory associated with regular memory. That is to say, in most cases, we're not dealing with simple, a period of time went by, I have no idea what happened, let's go check it out and go to a hypnotist. Generally, people have conscious, regular experiences that out of the ordinary, but I mean in terms of experientially, it's like regular conscious experiences of close encounters with aliens. Eddie Bullard gave you the description of the Betty and Barney Hill case, and that's kind of a prototype where there is a regular conscious awareness of an interaction with aliens, with UFOs and so forth, and then that is followed by a loss of time. So it's not simply in a vacuum that people have times they can't account for and then start exploring what happened. So these experiences sometimes are just like other regular, subjectively normal experiences, and sometimes they are delayed, and by that I mean people will have memory loss, missing time, but spontaneously, without any assistance, they will acquire other memories. And finally, we do have the assisted memories that we've been talking about quite a bit. That is where people go see a hypnotist or through a therapist or whatever, some intervention takes place in an attempt to regain some of the lost memories. Not losing a memory, but I'm losing my... There we go. As also has been talked about, the experiences are very detailed and elaborate. They're not simplistic experiences as they're reported. We'll talk a little bit more about consistency of the events. Eddie talked about that quite a bit already. Another point, maybe just to highlight, it is fairly common for people who have abduction experiences to have many of them. They don't have just one isolated experience. They report having multiple experiences, often over a lifetime, at least into adulthood. This last one deals with the prevalency of the experience. Just how common is it? It's not a very easy question to answer. It might seem easy, but it really isn't. What we can say objectively, and you can interpret this as you wish, but objectively, there are thousands of reports that we call filed case reports, individuals who have gone to individuals who are interested in studying alien abductions, and those are cases that are available for others to review and so forth. So there are at least thousands of such claims. There have been a couple of surveys that have been done. One survey I don't think we really want to focus on because it didn't really ask people whether they felt that they were abducted by aliens. It asked them whether they had certain kinds of experiences that might be associated with being abducted by aliens, and then they were interpreted to be abductees. But if you ask people the direct question, do you believe you personally have been abducted by aliens, for whatever it's worth, if you extrapolate from these national surveys to at least the U.S. population, you're talking about close to 1 million people who would endorse the statement, I have been abducted by aliens. So, given all these experiences, how might we account for them? Well, there are really quite a few explanations, as I indicated. As you might expect, many of them do have to deal with false memory, but a much broader definition of false memory than we've heard so far at this conference. I think it might be better to talk simply about false experiences, because a lot of these things don't have to do with memory, at least in the way we've been talking about it here so far. Of course, the instant after you have an immediate experience, you're talking about memory of the experience. So I guess to some extent we're always dealing with memory. But in terms of much delayed memory, memory long after the fact, hidden memory, and so forth, that's part of the theoretical picture, but there are also other theoretical approaches, as we'll see. The first explanation I want to talk about really has nothing to do with memory whatsoever. Hoaxes. This theory basically argues that abduction reports are deliberate attempts at deception. And the basis for such attempts would be for personal gain of one kind or another. And there certainly are opportunities for personal gain. There are opportunities for monetary gain. If you write a book about your abduction experiences, you can make money. We've had bestsellers that have been about abductions. There are other kinds of gains, kind we psychologists might call psychosocial gains. Abductees, there's a fairly widespread lecture circuit for abductees, various kinds of conferences and so forth. You can appear on television shows, things of this kind. So there are really opportunities for recognition, for approval, even for celebrity that might not otherwise be available to an individual. So certainly there's no question that there are opportunities to benefit from hoaxes. But in reality, there are very few attempts to capitalize on these opportunities. If you're going to capitalize on a hoax, you have to go public with your story. And many of us are familiar with those individuals who have done so, but by and large, most people who do report having abduction experiences do not engage in behaviors which would allow them to capitalize on their experience. Generally, they prefer not to make their experiences well known, beyond perhaps visiting an abduction investigator to share their experience, or to learn something more about it, or to go to a therapist if they're having problems dealing with their experiences. But for the most part, these people don't want to have their stories well known. They're much more concerned about protecting their reputations than risking them by going public. So really there are very few people who have looked at the phenomenon who accept the idea that hoaxes can account for very many of the explanations. Many of the experiences. Are there some hoaxes? No doubt there are. There are some very well-known cases that are highly suspect in this regard, but by and large, hoaxing can probably only count for a fairly small percentage of all abduction reports. Now, Rich McNally just talked a little bit about some of his research with a particular group of abductees, those who have apparent sleep paralysis. We'll talk more about that hypothesis in a moment, too. But in general, if we look at all abduction experiencers in terms of psychopathology, and this is something that has been looked at quite extensively, perhaps more than almost any other of the theories. This is one of the early theories that this is due to psychopathology. After all, if people are having experiences of things that are not really happening, then that might be a reflection of psychosis. It might reflect certain dissociative disorders. It's a perfectly reasonable and appropriate hypothesis to look at, and it has been looked at quite a bit. And in general, virtually all the studies that have done this find that the abductee population is really no different than the general population in terms of psychopathology. Again, are there any cases of psychopathology creating abduction experiences? Almost certainly there are. We've had some informal conversations, some of us who've been who are in the conference today, and we all have stories of people we've interacted with who are unquestionably suffering from psychopathology. I mean, they've been diagnosed as such, sometimes officially, sometimes unofficially, but usually it's unquestionable. So certainly, again, this theory will account for some abduction experiences, but the evidence suggests that it's unlikely to account for very many. Having talked about the disorders, clinical normality is normally what we find. Again, what Dr. McNally talked about is that you can talk about clinical normality. You can also talk about statistical normality, which is something different. You could be perfectly normal in a clinical sense and still not like everybody else. And there are a number of studies that do fairly consistently support as a finding that abductees are not just like everyone else. They do have characteristics which tend to discriminate them as a group. Of course, with all of these things, we're generalizing. It doesn't apply to every individual. But among other things, they report more stress, more experiences of childhood abuse, greater belief in psychic abilities, in particular their own psychic abilities. They're more guarded, more sensitive. They have a weaker sense of identity, a greater capacity for absorption in fantasy. And these facts have actually led to a number of sub-theories that, for time, I'm not going to go into, but they're based on the idea that there are particular personality types that have propensities to develop false experiences and to accept those false experiences as real experiences. But there's virtually no evidence to support these. So the theories are out there, but the data in support of them are really not. Now, one thing I think that hasn't been mentioned that should be mentioned is that many of these cases, even where we find these kinds of relationships, such as the fact that abductees are not like everybody else, what we're talking about are correlations. And if we really want to take a conservative scientific view of this, we need to understand what everybody who's taken a basic science course understands, is that a correlation does not establish cause and effect. And if you want to establish cause and effect, you have to show it by some other means simply than that a group of individuals tends to have certain kinds of characteristics. From the studies I've seen, there's no way to know for sure whether the kinds of differences we've talked about are the causes of abduction experiences or are caused by abduction experiences. You could also argue that if an individual has these very unusual kinds of experiences, that might lead them to be different in the characteristics that we've just described. So again, there are pros and cons to this particular theory. If you haven't noticed, now I have the pros in green and the cons in red. It's a little psychological thing there. But what I'm trying to do is just kind of present, again, as an overview, what the status of these theories are without making any personal case myself, and leave that for you to decide. One of the theories that's been kicking around is the idea of certain kinds of abnormal brain activity being a cause of abduction experiences. And the argument, it's in some ways similar to the sleep paralysis argument that you've already heard, and we'll be getting to in a moment. But some have argued that the temporal lobe of the brain can, or stimulation of the temporal lobe of the brain can produce hallucinogenic type experiences, which in some ways have the characteristics of, or at least share some of the characteristics with abduction experiences. For example, stimulation of the temporal lobe can give somebody a sense of an eerie presence. It can create a sense of floating or levitation. A number of things which are not uncommonly reported by abductees in regard to their abduction experiences. And the argument is that abductees may be prone to spontaneous activity of the temporal lobe. In other words, the phenomena I just talked about can be shown in the laboratory to occur by direct induction. But the argument is that abductees might just have some brain behaviors which are not typical, and this could result in this kind of hallucinatory activity. I'm aware of only one study that's attempted to actually look at this in abductees. Oops, it just disappeared. But what that said is that it didn't provide any support for that hypothesis. Basically, it found no more propensity for spontaneous temporal lobe activity in abductees than is found in the general population. There are other variations of this theory. Some argue that electromagnetic effects in the environment might trigger off anomalous brain activity in individuals who are particularly prone to them, as another example. But again, interesting theories, but there really isn't any evidence to support them. Now, the one we've heard a lot about is sleep paralysis. The idea that sleep paralysis may be the explanation for abduction phenomena stems from the idea that there are many reports of bedroom encounters. In other words, the abduction, the capture by aliens, takes place from the bedroom or sometimes during the middle of a night's sleep. And to the extent that that is happening, that would certainly be a hypothesis to consider. There are experiential similarities in both sleep paralysis and in abduction experiences, or bedroom encounters, both reported experiences, both reported as feeling subjectively awake. In both cases, there's a report of paralysis and the presence or the feeling of an eerie presence in the room. So these are some of the things that would be supportive of the idea that sleep paralysis is involved. However, on the other side of the coin, and feels terrified. There's another one there. Come on. There are also experiential differences. Generally, sleep paralysis experiences are rather vague. There's not much structure to them. If you look at abduction experiences, they generally are highly detailed, highly structured. There's an ongoing story evolving. It's not snapshot-like. It's more movie-like than you tend to get in sleep paralysis. So those subjects that Dr. Canali talked about, who said, I've had both and they're different. I'm not sure why they weren't able to explain the differences. Maybe they just weren't particularly articulate. But in any case, there are real experiential differences. So a sleep paralysis experience per se, just by itself, generally is not the kind of thing that we hear reported in terms of abduction experiences per se. Now, there's a more important issue, however. Many reports of abductions do not take place in the bedroom or in any way, shape, or form can seem to be reasonably connected with sleep. Many cases take place in situations where this just wouldn't make any sense at all, and any sleep-related issues could be effectively ruled out. For example, if a person reports being abducted while driving their car, that's not likely to involve a sleep paralysis episode. A sleep paralysis episode while driving your car is more likely to result in death than in an abduction experience. And in fact, if you look at the data, although it is true that bedroom encounter reports have increased over the years, and relative to all other kinds of reports have certainly gained in proportion. If you look at the entire corpus of abduction reports, bedroom encounters are not overall the most commonly reported setting for an abduction. A recent survey of recent abduction reports shows about an equal split between those reported to have taken place in bedroom-type encounters and those taking place in non-sleep-related types of settings. And if you look at the seminal years for abduction reports, according to at least one analysis where the study was done on cases reported prior to 1987, only 1 case in 4 were bedroom or sleep-related. In fact, there are twice as many reports of being abducted by cars than from the bedroom. So even if there is a causal link between sleep paralysis and abduction experiences, the point I am making is it cannot be a complete explanation for the phenomenon. Sleep paralysis can only account for a proportion of the reports, and perhaps not even most. Now, another phenomenon we've heard quite a bit about is hypnosis. And let me go through this quickly because I think we have said quite a bit about it already. You know it's often used to retrieve hidden memories. You know it produces false memories. One thing that I don't believe is mentioned is there have been, maybe it was, thank you. There have been studies that have looked at hypnotically induced abduction memories. That is, you hypnotize an individual and you ask them to imagine being abducted and to create an abduction story. And you compare those to the real abduction reports, the reports that are made by individuals who are not part of the experiment. And there are indeed similarities between the two, so that's supportive evidence. But there have also been other analyses, other content analyses, and there are some distinct differences. For example, one of the things you see in abduction accounts is not only consistency in terms of the overall story, but high consistency in terms of the order in which events unfold in the story. And that's not one of the things you see from the simulated hypnosis accounts. So here again, there are different pieces of evidence in terms of that. Another finding is that if you do an analysis of abduction reports that stem from hypnotic retrieval of memory, and then you look at those compared to abduction reports which did not involve memory hypnosis at all, you don't find differences there between the content of the reports. If, in fact, hypnosis is responsible for confabulation, for creating false memories, one might expect that there'd be clear differences between the body of reports coming out of hypnosis and those that are not, and we don't find that. But, as with sleep paralysis, in many cases, hypnosis is simply not used at all. In fact, again, surveys of existing abduction reports on file, if you will, suggest that hypnosis is used around 1/3 of the time if you look at the entire body of reports collectively. So there are quite a few reports or abduction accounts which have emerged in the absence of hypnosis. Again, does hypnotic confabulation and the false memory effects of it produce some abduction experiences? Unquestionably. Can it account for the phenomenon in its entirety? It would seem at face value it cannot, simply because hypnosis is not involved in a great many of the cases. So that leads us to the idea of converging influences. And this is primarily the kind of notion that Dr. McNally was talking about. And it really is becoming, and I think Eddie talked about it too, it really is becoming one of the more popular theories. And what it basically argues is that if each individual component cannot account for the phenomenon, then we put these components together and perhaps that would do a better job. So sleep paralysis, familiarity with the abduction script, investigator influence, hypnotic confabulation, and we have the actual data that Dr. McNally talked about, which is that individuals who fit this profile do indeed have false memory to a greater extent than those who do not. So these are definitely facts that have to be weighed. But as I've been pointing out, there are many